the Harvard of nonfiction. And today we are going to unlock something school never dared to touch, which is seduction. Yes, you heard it right. The art of seduction. So, this is not going to be just a summary video. Here we are going to decode seduction into lessons. So, are you guys ready? Let's begin. The art of seduction. Power, psychology, and pleasure. Let me just minimize me. Yeah, by the Non-Fiction Academy. So, as we all know, earlier in the history, power was just muscles. It was gained with power, and it was earned through violence and ruled by brute strength. Kings and warriors didn't need charms, they needed fear. In that world, women were completely powerless. They had no tools to compete in politics, war, or even at home. If a woman even tried to withhold her sex, it was even either taken by force or could be simply looked elsewhere, and she had no choice but to submit to this condition. And that's how the seduction was born. And let's learn about the birth of seduction. For most of history, power was defined by strength, violence, and masculinity, as we just learned in the previous slide. But women here find something else. They discovered a new kind of power. Not the power of swords or crowns, but the power of psychology. They mastered desire, imagination, and emotional influence. They awakened cravings of man that they cannot control. They planted fantasies that blurred the reality. And by emotional influence, they made man feel adored, understood, and even dependent. And through this, they reinvented power itself. And that's how seduction was born as a women's weapon, which was subtle, invisible, and impossible to resist. And here, Robert Greene says that of course, man had one weakness, the insatiable desire for sex. Now let's learn about how the first seductresses were born. Few of them were Old Testament Helen of Troy, the Chinese siren Hishishi, and the greatest of them all was Cleopatra. They allured their appearances, they crafted themselves into a goddess look. They fantasized the creation, they offered men more than just sex. They offered the dream of possessing them, which became unattainable for the man. They helped the men to escape from the masculine world. They drew away them from their politics, war, and every other thing to the women's world, which was filled with luxury, spectacle, and pleasure. They hooked themselves, they gave attention, and they suddenly turned cold to withdraw the attention. Psychological warfare, which means power was mental and not physical. The women, did not have to use any sword or any army. This war was fighted with just psychology and not with the swords. Now, let's talk about the historical impact. Cleopatra, Helen of Troy, and every other one. They were the mighty rulers who were who created the seduction. And let's learn about now the seduction as a warfare. So basically, throughout the history, seduction was not just lust, it was fantasy. Let's take an example of Cleopatra. She didn't want an army to gain control over Julius Caesar and even Mark Antony. What she did was she just carried them into the mighty river Nile, and there she appeared in a goddess appearances, which means she can lure them both. Helens of Troy. Throughout the history, she was a legend. She launched thousands of ships, embodying destructive forces, and she became the seductress. Now, similarly, one of the four greatest beauties of China, she manipulated her charm, and that's how the seductresses were born. And what was their weapon? They mastered the art of anticipation. They cultivated mystique, the illusion of vulnerability, and the emotional choreography they did in their private world. All this led to the born of seduction. But you guys must be wondering, man must remain silent. They should also do something. And yes, they did. Man also entered the game. As Neon Din Elons says, much more genius is needed to make love than to command armies. Earlier times, as we have just studied, the seduction was a feminine art, but suddenly man also came into the force. Figures like Duke de Lazun, Don Juan, this guy over here, he's Don Juan. they also began to adopting feminine tactics of seduction, and suddenly they started to make their own ways of seducing, which included playful charm, muscular dimension, and seductive languages. They use soft words, and that's how they start the masculine seduction. Now, seduction was not just for seducing women, it also entered in the court and culture. Artists, actors, and even dandies, all of them used seduction to seduce a mass number of people. Now, you must be familiar with this meme of Napoleon where he says, "There's nothing we can do." But quite ironically, he did a lot of things. He was the only person who gave birth to the mass seduction, where he used seduction to increase his charisma and power, and that's how, by gaining control over this much big army, he became a great leader. Now, on the next slide, let's learn about modern seduction. Okay, don't blame me. She's not an OF model, obviously, but yeah, I can't find a less vulgar image than hers. So let's learn about modern seduction. We guys must be familiar with the seduction and how the charisma is happening in our world. We scroll the social media, we watch movies, and all the media stuff. The film industry, celebrity, and all the advertising peoples where they use seductive stars, seductive messages, and all other things to lure the audiences, to lure the customers. There are many timeless methods, like Cleopatra once did. Now, just keep one thing in mind that seduction was never forceful, it was never direct, it was instead a pleasurable bit. Seduction also entered into politics and charisma, where, uh, where political leaders like John F. Kennedy and other leaders relied on charisma, presence, and charm to capture attention, and half the battle was winning in this. Now, after all this, you must be wondering that what seduction really is. Seduction is not sex, it's not love, it's the power to make someone dream. As Robert Greene says, a person in love is easier to control than the one in lust. Don't look at this BDSM image. I'm sorry about that. But here's what the Robert Greene says. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will of power, power itself in the man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. And what is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. Now, it is a psychological art, not physical beauty. Now, when this is guys, I just forgot to mention that this is just introduction. Don't worry about anything. This is just introduction. And in the first lesson, where we will talk about the siren, I will let you know how ugly the Cleopatra looked, and still, she's the only one who gave the birth to seduction. So, that's quite sure that it's not about physical beauty, it's about psychological art, it's about the moments of surrender, it's about strategy over chance. Now, I will tell you how you can use the seduction in everyday life, in your everyday encounters. The seducer's life is a theater. I'm sorry, this image is not uploading. I really added something important here. But, anyways, no issue. So, let's learn about the seducer's mindset. So, who is really a seducer? He is the one who never turns off their influence. Every interaction, whether it's social, professional, or personal, he or she sees it as an opportunity to charm, guide, or to create fascinations. The world is a stage for them. They prefer subtlety over force. Sexual or romantic desire is quite lower down. As I mentioned from earlier, that seduction is not about sex, it's about the process where the pleasant presence makes the remark. They build momentums, they strategize, and they use the psychology. And there's one universal principle for this that erotic desires and love exist beneath the surface of nearly all human interactions. By seeing the world through the eyes of a seducer, every encounter, no matter how casual, can be transformed into an opportunity of connection. Now, that's all we had for just an introduction. And here's the final takeaway, which is by Robert Greene. Nothing brings more power in the modern world than the ability to seduce. And here we come. This is NFA, and this is another 20-minute YouTube summary you can find. And I'm guessing you must be looking us like this only. So we promise to bring that girl to your brand, to your bed. Subscribe. And on the next, we're gonna do a quick video about just reading the syllabus of the Art of Seduction, and after that, the real game will begin. Starting from with the siren, and it will continue. Follow us if you want such amazing concept, and thank you for watching the video.